I married my childhood sweetheart Beckett, and in the second month of our marriage, my twin sister, who had been in a vegetative state due to a car accident, woke up. That day, Beckett sat in the study all day, staring at a photo of my sister. When my sister woke up and learned that Beckett had married me, she silently shed tears all day. Caught in the middle, I became the biggest obstacle between them. Everyone was pressuring me to divorce Beckett and return him to my sister, but I found out I was pregnant at this very moment. My sister's heart was shattered. Disregarding all objections, she married a man from far away, and a year later died in childbirth on a hospital bed. My entire family blamed me, and when I fell into the river in a daze, Beckett, his face full of hatred, told me to join my sister in death. Yet at the very moment I was about to die, he grabbed my hand and desperately pulled me back up. He said he didn't actually hate me, he just couldn't accept the fact that my sister was gone. He also said that if there were a next life, he hoped I would never marry him. I closed my eyes in pain, and when I opened them again, I found myself back on the day my parents forced me to marry Beckett in my sister's place. Look how beautiful this wedding dress is. If Esme hadn't had that accident, she could have worn it and married Beckett as she wished. My mother stroked the custom-made wedding dress before her, her eyes reddening as her voice gradually choked with emotion. My dad sighed upon hearing this. I'm also heartbroken about Esme, but please don't say such things again. In just a few days, Iris will be marrying Beckett. If you say too much, Iris will be upset. He meant for my mom to stop talking nonsense, but she wouldn't listen to any of it. She tearfully accused my father. Others might not know, but how could you not? Iris is nothing but a jinx. Esme's accident was all her fault. She's never been as sensible as Esme since childhood, and now she's even jealous of Esme's good marriage. With Esme lying in the hospital, she probably can't hide her joy at finally getting to marry Beckett. I stood outside the door, hearing the familiar voices inside, and finally came back to my senses. I had actually been reborn at this exact moment. In my previous life, after my sister Esme became a vegetative state due to a car accident, my mother often cursed me with reddened eyes, calling me a jinx. She said I was a bad seed from the womb, absorbing too much nutrition and causing Esme to be frail and sickly from childhood. Esme was finally about to marry the love of her life, but I ruined it again and stole her future brother-in-law. No matter how many times I explained to her, insisting that I had no intention of marrying Beckett, she refused to believe me. She warned me not to get near Beckett, praying every day for Esme to wake up and marry him. But Esme remained unconscious for 2 months with no signs of waking. Eventually, even the doctor said the chances of her waking up were extremely slim. When my mother heard this, she completely broke down and hurled a teacup at my head, screaming hoarsely, "Why is it your sister lying here instead of you?" Overcome with rage, she even lunged at me to slap me as she spoke. At the critical moment, however, my father suddenly reached out to stop her. Just as I was feeling surprised, I heard my father say in a low voice, "The wedding date is approaching. Esme has already had an accident. If you enter Iris as well, who will marry into the family?" My heart instantly turned cold, and my throat filled with the taste of bitterness. The rare time they helped me was only because I had value. I opened my mouth, wanting to refuse, but my mother, shocked by my father's words, had already started arguing with him. The two argued fiercely until, in the end, my mother gritted her teeth and agreed to my father's idea. Neither of them asked whether I was willing to marry in Esme's place. The wedding dress arrived at our home today, yet my mother persisted in cursing me stubbornly. Staring at the bedroom door before me, I reached out and pushed it open without hesitation. "I've said it before, I don't like Beckett. It was you who forced me to marry him in my sister's place." My tone was flat. At my words, my mother froze briefly before rising to her feet in fury. "We forced you to marry Beckett? Iris, don't flatter yourself. If you hadn't jinxed your sister into the hospital, such good fortune would never have fallen to you." My father didn't approve of my mother speaking such harsh words, but he was even more displeased with my attitude. With a darkened expression, he looked at me reproachfully. "Iris, what nonsense about replacement? Our marriage arrangement with Beckett was settled long ago. Whether it's you or your sister, both of you have the obligation to fulfill this engagement. Just as I expected. In my past life, I had clearly stated that I didn't like Beckett, but my mother simply wouldn't believe me. My father, afraid that I might refuse to marry, used the word obligation to pressure me. Actually, in wealthy families, it's quite normal to fulfill duties for the sake of the family, including arranged marriages. The problem, however, lies in my parents' favoritism toward Esme. Esme had been coddled and cherished by them since childhood. In their eyes, the hope of Esme waking up was too slim. That's why they gritted their teeth and decided to keep the gravy in the family by pushing the marriage onto me. Not only was I forced into this marriage, but I would also have to endure my mother's curses for marrying Beckett. Until Esme woke up, and my parents' grief turned to joy. But when they saw Esme crying and refusing to eat or drink because of my marriage to Beckett, they regretted it again. They regretted it, but instead of trying to make amends themselves, they forced me to divorce Beckett so they could return him to Esme. Later, when I found out I was pregnant and Beckett's parents told me to rest and take care of the baby, my mother privately confronted me to interrogate me. "You clearly know your sister likes Beckett. Now that she's awake, why don't you abort the child and give Beckett back to her? You jinx, do you really want to see your sister suffer for the rest of her life?" At that time, I tearfully called my father, asking him to talk some sense into my mother. After all, it was they who had forced me to fulfill my duty in the first place. But after a 2-second silence on the other end of the line, my father sighed and finally said, "Iris, just give Beckett back to your sister. Your sister's health has always been fragile, and it's rare for her to fall for someone. You can't possibly want to watch her cry herself to sleep every day, can you?" My heart gradually turned cold, and tears silently slid down my cheeks. Perhaps because I didn't respond for a long time, my father's voice grew impatient when he spoke again. "Iris, it's not that your mother and I are favoring your sister, it's just that she has suffered too much. Once you get the abortion and divorce Beckett, I'll send you abroad so you can live the life you want, okay? When they needed me, they confined me at home and forced me to marry Beckett. I had finally convinced myself to compromise, and now they talk about giving me the life I want, as if they can't wait to shove me far away. As a child, whenever my parents favored Esme, they would say she had a hard life and I should give in to her. I thought it meant sharing some of my happiness with her, but it turned out I had to give up everything. Finally, I'm certain, my parents don't love me at all." Snapping back to reality, I kept my expression calm and firmly refused this time. No matter how Esme is doing now, Beckett is still technically my brother-in-law. I won't marry him. My mom snorted in disbelief after hearing it, putting on an act. I suddenly smiled at her. "Believe it or not, but I will absolutely not marry him. Even if they keep me locked at home, this time I won't compromise again." My mother still doesn't believe me, but my father sees I'm serious. His brows instantly furrowed as he slammed his hand heavily on the table, saying in a low voice, "Nonsense. An engagement arranged by the elders, how can you, as my daughter, refuse to marry on a whim?" His face was stern, and in the past, what I feared most was his strict fatherly demeanor. But after witnessing how biased his heart could be, I was no longer afraid of him. I met his gaze without a trace of panic in my expression and said word by word, "In any case, there's no way I'm getting married." My mother had never heard me speak like this before. For a moment, she seemed stunned, then snapped back to reality and sneered, "Now you say you won't marry, but don't go throwing yourself at Beckett when he arrives later." My father cut her off sharply, "You shut up." After speaking, he fixed his gaze on me, and after a few seconds, he said in a deep voice, "Iris, your mother only said a few words. As her daughter, must you really hold on to it so tightly? Even if you're angry, you shouldn't say such things when it comes to marriage." As soon as he finished speaking, without waiting for my reaction, he called out, "Someone, take the second young lady upstairs to freshen up and change. Beckett will be here soon." I didn't even have the ability to resist before being pulled upstairs by the maid. When Beckett arrived, I was dragged to the living room again. When Beckett saw me, he was momentarily stunned before frowning in disgust. I felt nothing inside, so I simply sat down on the sofa across from him. Esme and I are twins. The only difference is that Esme has a teardrop mole under her eye, while I don't. Beckett placed the prenuptial agreement in front of me and said coldly, "Here's the prenup. Sign it if there's no issue." I sat on the sofa and didn't reach for it, because I still remember the contents of the agreement to this day. After marrying him in Esme's place, I couldn't stop him from visiting Esme long-term. Once I got pregnant, we would have to sleep separately. In my past life, the clothing store I worked so hard to open was controlled by my father. Until the wedding, he was afraid I might back out at the last minute, so he locked me up at home. In despair, I reluctantly signed the agreement. After marriage, Beckett and I maintained a respectful yet distant relationship, living an uneventful life. Until Esme woke up, that day, Beckett sat in the study all day staring at Esme's photo. Then, drunk that night, he choked me by the neck. "Iris, you knew perfectly well that I was supposed to marry your sister, knew I was forced by my family to marry you, so why did you agree to it back then? Do you have any idea how devastated Esme was when she woke up in the hospital and heard we'd gotten married? I don't understand, even though I was forced into this situation too, why is everyone blaming me after Esme woke up? My parents hid the fact that I was pregnant from Esme, trying to pressure me into divorce so Esme could have her way. But the news still got out. When Esme found out, her heart turned to ashes. Despite her family's attempts to stop her, she married and moved far away, only to die in childbirth a year later, alone on a hospital bed. My child is safe and healthy, having celebrated the 100th day banquet, yet my sister perished with her unborn baby. My mother became even more convinced that I was the one who cursed Esme, crying that she would beat me to death. My father seemed to age 10 years overnight. Though he didn't scream at me like my mother did, his gaze was filled with unmistakable hatred, as if silently asking why it was my sister who died instead of me. When my entire family blamed me and I, in a daze, fell into the river, Beckett, who had just finished arranging my sister's funeral, found me with reddened eyes, his face twisted in hatred, demanding that I atone for my sister's death by joining her in the grave. Our child was still young, yet for Esme's sake, he cursed me with the vilest words, wishing me dead. Overwhelmed by despair, I stopped struggling. But the moment I was truly about to die, he grabbed my hand and desperately pulled me back up. He told me with a pained look in his eyes that he didn't actually hate me, he just couldn't accept the fact that his sister was gone. He also said if there was a next life, he hoped I would never marry him. But honestly, he didn't need to tell me any of this. Because marrying him is something I deeply regret too. Now that I've been given a second chance, I refuse to repeat the same mistake. I'd be more than happy to let him be with his sister. Beckett, take the prenup back. I won't marry you. I looked up at him, my gaze steady. Beckett seemed taken aback by my words, casting me a surprised glance. A couple of days ago, my mother had tearfully told him that I had always been jealous of my sister's good engagement, and now that I could marry him in her place, I must be overjoyed. This made him detest me. Even though he agreed to the marriage under family pressure, he refused to show me any kindness. But today, upon meeting, the situation seemed quite different from what she had described. Without waiting for Beckett to respond, I continued, I know that my brother-in-law, like me, was forced into this by our families. Although my sister is still in the hospital, there's still a chance she might wake up. She certainly wouldn't want to find out you married me when she comes to. Beckett was silent for a moment, then lowered his eyes and said with visible pain, of course I don't want Esme to be upset. But it's been 2 months already, and she still hasn't woken up. Even the doctors say the chances of her waking are slim. I really don't dare to hold on to hope anymore. He finished speaking and looked up at me. Our families will be collaborating in the future, so the engagement cannot be cancelled. Even if we have to wait for Esme to wake up, we still need to look ahead. After saying this, Beckett pushed the prenuptial agreement closer to me. I frowned. Although I knew Beckett was unaware that Esme would wake up in 3 months, I still felt an instinctive sense of disgust. He was the first to compromise and agree to marry me. Now that I've clearly expressed my unwillingness and given him the chance to be with Esme, he's urging me to agree to the marriage. This proves that Beckett didn't leave himself even the slightest room for regret. So why did he blame all the mistakes on me when he was overwhelmed with remorse 3 months later? I frowned at him, my tone turning cold. You're willing to give up on my sister and move forward, but I refuse to marry you because I don't like you at all. Beckett comes from a good family and is handsome enough, precisely why my mother had always warned me to stay away from him. She was afraid I might actually develop feelings for him, but the truth is, I never liked him in the slightest. Now that I've realized Beckett's selfish nature, I want even less to have any further contact with him in the future. It was probably the first time Beckett had heard someone reject him so decisively, and his expression became visibly unsettled. He said with a darkened expression, "It's an arranged marriage. Whether we like it or not is secondary." Just as I was about to mock him, my father's voice rang out from the corner of the staircase. Beckett is right. An arranged marriage is all for the mutual benefit of both families. After speaking, my father shifted his gaze to me, his eyes carrying a strong warning. These two people, who would come to deeply regret their decisions in the future, were now pressuring me into marriage. How ironic. Seeing my cold expression, Beckett even tried to reassure me, "Iris, after marrying me, you can continue running your clothing store and live the life you want." His words sounded pleasant, but all of it was based on the assumption that Esme wouldn't wake up. The moment she did, they would immediately regret it and show their selfish true colors. Disgusted, I frowned and couldn't help but stand up. Big sister has only been in a coma for 2 months, yet you're already in such a hurry to marry me off. It seems your love for her isn't that strong after all. My tone was mocking, trying to provoke Beckett into calling off the engagement. And indeed, he was provoked, his face instantly turned pale, his eyes brimming with pain. But soon, he forced himself to regain his composure and said guiltily, "In this regard, I really owe Esme an apology, but for the sake of our family's cooperation, I had no other choice." What a load of had no choice. After Esme woke up, he kept saying how much he regretted it, how desperately he loved Esme, even questioning why I had agreed to marry him in the first place. As a result, now that I've repeatedly given him the chance to reject the marriage, he insists on marrying me. He doesn't want to ruin the collaboration between our families, yet refuses to regret it in the future. How can he have it both ways? Anger simmered in my chest, and I retorted bluntly, "Then suffer alone if you must. I believe my sister will wake up." With those words, I tore up the prenuptial agreement on the table and threw the pieces into the trash, then marched upstairs, ignoring the warning in my father's eyes. "Iris, come back here. If you keep being this willful, don't even think about keeping that clothing store of yours open." Seeing me head upstairs without hesitation, my father couldn't hold back any longer and threatened me in a deep voice. At the mention of the clothing store, my steps faltered for just a moment, but after only a second, I continued up the stairs. Ever since I was a child, my parents have favored Esme, never sparing me a second glance. With little love in this household, I poured all my energy into pursuing my own dreams. That clothing store was opened with my own hard-earned money, requiring immense effort before the business gradually improved. It's fair to say it's the most important thing to me right now. In my past life, I couldn't bear the threat of my clothing store being shut down, so I chose to compromise. Yet after marrying Beckett, my mother still managed to close my store because she was unhappy about me marrying him. So this time around, I figured it out. Since my clothing store would be shut down whether I marry or not, I might as well give it up altogether. If I succeeded in opening it once, I can succeed again. It's not worth sacrificing my entire life for one store. Before closing the door, I heard my father apologizing to Beckett. "Beckett, don't blame Iris. Everyone knows you're close to Esme, she's just afraid marrying you would invite gossip. Her mother and I will talk some sense into her, don't worry." Beckett stayed silent for 2 seconds before replying, "Once Iris marries me, she'll be my rightful wife, and I'll make sure she never suffers." "You have my word on that." For now, I'll go check on Esme at the hospital and continue wedding preparations. I'll leave Iris in your and Auntie's care. I couldn't stand the disgust in my heart any longer. I forcefully shut the door and locked it from the inside. When my mom came back and heard that I had refused to marry Beckett to his face, she banged on my door angrily, her voice full of fury. "Iris, you stupid girl. Open this door right now. You went and blabbered nonsense in front of Beckett, embarrassing our entire family. You better go tell him you're willing to marry him right now. Do you hear me?" Sitting on the edge of the bed while gathering my documents, I no longer held back and snapped back at her upon hearing her orders again. "You really have a short memory for someone so noble. Just a while ago, you were warning me not to harbor any wild fantasies, terrified I might steal my future brother-in-law. Now you can't wait to marry me off to him. What's the matter? Afraid Beckett might fall for someone else while Esme is in a coma, so you're rushing to have me, her own sister, keep the spot warm?" Upon hearing this, my mother banged on the door even louder. "Iris, what nonsense are you spouting?" She was furious, but I knew that was exactly what she was thinking. In my past life, after Esme died, I once overheard my mother crying to my father, saying, if only I'd known how selfish that wretched Iris was, I never would have agreed to let her marry Beckett. She used her pregnancy to tie him down and drove my Esme to her death. She was filled with grief and indignation, saying so much. Only then did I realize that my father wanted me to marry Beckett for the sake of the collaboration between our families, while my mother was paving the way for her beloved eldest daughter. In her heart, as long as there was even the slightest hope that her daughter would wake up, Beckett couldn't fall in love with anyone else. That's why, after a fierce argument with my father, she agreed to let me marry him. If my sister never woke up, Beckett would yearn for her for the rest of his life. And if she did wake up, my mother would force me to divorce and give Beckett up. To put it bluntly, she was using my lifelong happiness to secure the position of Mrs. Beckett. For the first time, I realized just how far her love for my sister could go. I sneered mockingly, finished packing my things, and replied to her, "Then I guessed wrong. You don't need to test me anymore. Don't worry, I will absolutely not marry Beckett." Seeing that I was serious, my mother's voice grew frantic. "How can you not marry? If you don't, then, what about the collaboration between our families?" Ignoring her, I opened the window and tossed down the bedsheet I had just tied together. Whether it was the clothing store or Esme lying in the hospital, let them handle it however they pleased. I slung my bag over my shoulder and climbed down the bedsheet. The moment my feet touched the grass, I heard the panicked voice of the butler. "Something terrible has happened. Beckett got into a car accident on his way back. He's at the hospital now." I stood frozen in shock. Beckett in a car accident? I remembered the events of my previous life vividly, and this had definitely never happened. My parents rushed out upon hearing the news and immediately asked the driver to take them to the hospital. Hiding behind the wall, I waited until they left. Shoving aside my confusion, I quickly ran out of the villa. I bought a new phone and, with the help of friends I reconnected with, rented a place. My visa was hidden, so I had to get it reissued first. Until then, I couldn't leave. Only after moving into the rental did I slowly begin to relax. Just as I finished unpacking, my phone buzzed with a screenshot a friend had sent. "Iris, Beckett just posted this on his feed. Is it true?" Confused, I tapped on the screenshot and froze. A few minutes earlier, Beckett had suddenly posted on his feed. "The rumors about Iris and me getting close are false. Esme has always been my only fiancé. I'll wait for her to wake up and propose to her." The fact that someone who was trying to persuade me to marry him just hours ago could change his tune so quickly could only mean one thing: Beckett had also been reborn. In the previous life, Beckett couldn't be with Esme and regretted it deeply. So after being reborn, the first thing he did was to distance himself from me and declare his intention to wait for Esme to wake up. Looking at this screenshot, I smiled. Since Beckett has made it clear that he wants to wait for Esme, does that mean my mom will stop targeting my clothing store? When in danger, I naturally couldn't care less about the clothing store I had worked so hard to open. But now that there's a chance to save the shop, I'm definitely going to try. My mind began to race, and I quickly contacted my friends. As for the news of Beckett marrying Esme, I was pleased to see it happen. But my father wasn't willing. He tracked down my new number and called me. "Iris, I don't care where you are right now, but come to the hospital immediately and convince Beckett to go back, then figure out how to make him marry you instead." I didn't expect it to be him calling. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard my mother scolding my father on the other end. "What do you mean? It's good that Beckett wants to stay by Esme's side, why are you forcing him to be with that jinx?" The two of them bickered back and forth over the phone. It turned out that as soon as Beckett woke up from his hospital bed, he immediately rushed to Esme's ward. He stood by her bed with tear-stained eyes, then informed both sets of parents to postpone the wedding. He said he believed Esme would wake up soon, but my dad and Beckett's parents all thought he'd lost his mind. After all, in their eyes, if even the doctors said the chances were slim, it meant she was unlikely to wake up. Beckett's parents didn't want their son to keep waiting foolishly, so they earnestly persuaded him to go home and rest for a couple of days, then marry me. But Beckett was exceptionally stubborn, and no one could persuade him otherwise. My father, afraid it would affect the collaboration between the two families, urged me to go and convince him to return, to try to change Beckett's mind. Only my mother, who cared deeply for her daughter, fully supported Beckett staying with Esme. They disagreed vehemently and argued fiercely. I gloated and chimed in, "It's wonderful that my brother-in-law is willing to wait for my sister. Dad, you should be happy about it." My father shouted angrily my name, "Iris, you ungrateful daughter." "Nothing else? I'm hanging up then. You guys stay at the hospital and take good care of sis and brother-in-law." I said indifferently and hung up directly, then blacklisted his number. I didn't expect that after hanging up on my dad, I'd see Beckett's mom again just tens of minutes later. She gave me a once-over, then reluctantly stepped into the rental apartment with a cold expression. "Auntie, what brings you here today?" I sat back down on the sofa and asked her. Beckett's mother looked at me with displeasure. "Iris, I don't mean to criticize you, but you're about to marry Beckett soon. He will be your husband. In a marriage, the fortunes of husband and wife are shared. When one thrives, both thrive. When one suffers, both suffer. If he acts recklessly today, how can you just stand by and watch?" I was unfazed by Beckett's mother's attitude. Although our families had been on good terms, ours had lagged behind theirs in recent years. As the gap widened, Beckett's mother had grown increasingly condescending toward my family. In my past life, I had signed a prenuptial agreement and married into their family, where she frequently criticized me and looked down on me in every way. I smiled faintly and replied calmly, "Auntie, I think you're mistaken. Beckett is my future brother-in-law. I'm still waiting for my sister to wake up so they can hold their wedding." Beckett's mother's face changed instantly, and she blurted out, "Esme, that sickly girl, I never liked her from the start." Only after she finished speaking did she realize how inappropriate her words were, and her expression turned extremely unpleasant. I could only smile helplessly. "Well, there's nothing we can do about it. Beckett and my sister are deeply in love. Even if you, as the mother-in-law, aren't satisfied, I can't very well break them apart." I made it clear that I had no intention of being with Beckett, which made her expression turn even darker. She probably never expected me to take this stance. When she stood up, her face was frighteningly black. "Fine, today I misjudged you. Came here for nothing." She held back her anger and left. I followed her to the door and shut it right after she walked out. Through the door, I could hear Beckett's mother finally losing her temper and cursing. "What kind of person is this? Absolutely no manners, totally unworthy of my son." I shrugged it off with a smile. My mom thought Esme would live a blessed life after marrying Beckett, so she kept warning me. But she didn't consider her. With Beckett's mother's attitude that no one was ever good enough for her son, how could Esme possibly fare well after entering their family? I shook my head, dismissing the thought, and focused on finishing my tasks. Perhaps knowing Esme would wake up soon, Beckett had been staying at the hospital all this time, taking care of her with unwavering devotion. His mother repeatedly urged him to give up. When Beckett refused to listen, she even threatened to cut ties with him in frustration. Yet Beckett remained firm in his decision. He simply said, "Mom, I've walked through death's door and come out the other side. I've made up my mind, I won't compromise again." His mother was so angry she ended up in the hospital that very day. When she woke up and saw Beckett still holding the same stance, she smashed everything she could get her hands on in the hospital room. Even my dad was furious and anxious, stepping in personally to persuade him. But it was useless. The more they tried to talk him out of it, the deeper Beckett's desire to make it up to Esme became. Before anyone knew it, Beckett had already stayed in the hospital for over a month. Just as the parents from both families were discussing tying him up and forcing the wedding, Esme woke up. Her timing couldn't have been more perfect. My dad, who had initially been on the same side as Beckett's parents, instantly shifted his loyalty to his beloved eldest daughter. Beckett's mother disapproved of her son's intention to marry the frail girl, but that day, reporters caught wind of the news and published an article about it. Everyone outside was praising Beckett for his devotion. Backing out of the wedding at such a time would undoubtedly bring negative repercussions. Reluctantly, Beckett's mother had no choice but to agree. When I heard the news that the two would soon hold their wedding, I finally felt at ease. This time, when my mother messaged me to go to the hospital, I didn't refuse again. I took a taxi to the hospital, and as soon as I approached the ward door, I saw Beckett. He was peeling fruit for Esme, his gaze full of adoration as he looked at her. The hospital room was quiet, and Esme was the first to notice me. She waved at me, "Iris, you're here, come on in." Beckett's hand, which was peeling a fruit, visibly paused for a moment before he continued without looking up. Although he quickly regained his composure, Esme still noticed. A flicker of dissatisfaction flashed in her eyes. Though she was still smiling when she looked at me, there was clear hostility in her gaze. I wasn't the least bit surprised. Esme and I are twins. Outsiders assume we must be extremely close, but the truth is quite the opposite. Esme resents her poor health and has come to believe my mother's claim that I am the one who brings her misfortune. Her hatred for me has only grown deeper over time. I've explained and tried to mend our relationship, but all I got in return was her deliberately falling to the ground and framing me for pushing her. Every time I was grounded by my parents, she would flash that gleeful smile. After many times, I knew there could never be the sisterly bond between us like in other families. "I heard Mom and Dad almost forced you to marry Beckett a while back?" She smiled and asked, as if it were just a casual question. But I knew she cared deeply about the matter, so I replied, "Yes, it did happen, but both my brother-in-law and I refused." Hearing how I addressed her, the hostility in Esme's eyes instantly diminished. Beckett, however, seemed uncomfortable and frowned slightly. He didn't say anything but followed me out when I left the ward. "Iris, I know, you've also come back. Only now do I realize you were forced back then too. I'm sorry." His tone was remorseful, but I found it hypocritical. To achieve his goals, he had ignored my refusal and pressured me into marrying him alongside my father. Now that he regrets it, he suddenly pretends to understand my grievances. It's just disgusting. I turned to look at him, my tone distant. "No need to apologize. Everything is back on track now. I wish you and my sister a lifetime of happiness together, with unwavering love." I thought Beckett would be pleased to hear me say this. Instead, he gave me a complicated look, remaining silent for a long time before finally uttering a low "ahm-ham." I instinctively disliked the ambiguous expression he directed at me. As soon as he responded, I left without hesitation. Esme recovered in the hospital for a while before being discharged. Within days of her discharge, our parents hastily arranged a wedding for her and Beckett, calling his parents in to hold the ceremony. Seeing Esme marrying Beckett with a blissful expression, my mom burst into tears of joy and stopped targeting me as she had before. Seizing the opportunity, I partnered with a friend to expand our clothing store to another city, ensuring my father could no longer use it to threaten me. I also successfully moved away, distancing myself from both families. I thought everything had settled, and their affairs would no longer concern me. But one night, I suddenly received a call from Esme. Her tone was full of resentment as she gritted her teeth and accused me. "Iris, you wretched bitch. What kind of spell have you cast on Beckett? Even in his dreams, he calls out your name. You ruined my health since childhood, and now you're trying to steal my man too?" She was speaking more and more offensively. Frowning, I muttered weirdo and hung up the next second. As for Esme saying Beckett called my name, I figured she must have misheard. In my past life, I was married to Beckett for over a year, and he often stared at my sister's photos in a daze. He frequently called out Esme's name in his sleep. Beckett might be selfish, but he had finally married the person he'd longed for all this time. How could he possibly be playing games within just a few months? Thinking this way, I unexpectedly ran into Beckett, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, downstairs the next day. Spotting me descending the stairs, he flashed me a smile. "Long time no see. Aren't you going to invite me up?" I gazed at him calmly, the memory of him choking me and cursing in the previous life still vivid in my mind. I didn't believe we were on terms to sit down and chat idly. Beckett felt uncomfortable under my gaze. Seeing him remain silent, I asked directly, "So, what brings you here?" Noticing the detachment in my attitude, a flicker of hurt flashed through Beckett's eyes. "About the past, I was wrong to treat you that way, but having grown up together, surely we can find a place to talk." He gave a bitter smile, and at once, I sensed something was off. Recalling Esme's phone call last night, I immediately frowned. "Beckett, last time you regretted not being with your sister. Now that you've married her, do you regret it again?" The word again carried an especially sharp sarcasm. Beckett's face gradually paled, and he looked at me with regret in his eyes. "Iris, I thought I deeply loved Esme, but after getting married, I realized I didn't love her that much. Beckett didn't know how to continue. In his previous life, after marrying Iris, he didn't return home often, but every time he did, the house was always meticulously organized and warm. Back then, he didn't pay much attention to it. After being reborn and successfully marrying Esme as he wished, he naturally assumed the home would be the same. But it was completely different. Esme had been frail since childhood, always carrying a faint medicinal scent. Beckett thought he was used to that smell, but only when the house was filled with it every day did he realize he wasn't accustomed to it at all. Beckett tried to get used to it completely, but just as he adjusted, a new problem arose. Esme was in poor health, and for her sake, they often had to sleep in separate rooms. When Beckett's mother found out about this, she scolded Esme, calling her a useless invalid, while Esme tearfully demanded his support. The household was in chaos, with frequent arguments. At first, Beckett would sympathetically side with Esme, but as time passed, he grew weary of watching her stubbornly argue with his mother. He felt weary and lost, no longer knowing why he had gone to such lengths to marry Esme in the first place. Last night, Esme questioned why he had called out Iris's name in his sleep, and Beckett, annoyed by her crying, simply drove out of the house. Deep down, Beckett knew that leaving in the middle of the night wasn't just because Esme annoyed him, he genuinely missed the days after his marriage to Iris. Back then, he only got angry with Iris because of Esme, but otherwise, life was smooth. Looking back now, if Esme hadn't come between them, he might have grown to love Iris over time. Beckett thought it over and finally spoke, "Iris, what if I said I regret it?" I didn't hesitate to interrupt him, speaking in a cold tone, "Your regrets have nothing to do with me. Because whether in my past life or now, I've never loved you, not even a little." He regretted not being with my sister when he married me, and now that he's gotten his wish to be with her in this second chance at life, he regrets it again. I just find it laughable. Whether he regrets it or not doesn't concern me, but for the sake of a peaceful life going forward, I need to completely sever his hopes. My words were final, and Beckett's face grew even paler. The phone rang, and as I suspected, when I answered it, my mother's voice sounded from the other end the very next second. "Iris, you little hussy. Did Beckett go to see you?" My mother's voice was full of anger, and if you listened closely, you could even hear Esme's pitiful sobbing. "Mom, Beckett doesn't love me anymore, I might as well just die." As soon as Esme finished speaking, my mother's fury grew even fiercer. "Iris, you make Beckett come back right now, or I won't acknowledge you as my daughter anymore." Her voice was too loud, so I moved the phone away from my ear and deliberately called out to Beckett with a laugh. "Did you hear that? Brother-in-law, your wife and mother-in-law are both waiting for you to go back. Stop bothering me." I left no room for negotiation, and Beckett, seeing no possibility, left with a pale face. Not long after he left, my dad called me on someone else's phone. He didn't start cursing like my mom did. He didn't mention Esme's grievances, nor did he speak ill of Beckett. Instead, he told me, "Our collaboration with the Beckett family has already begun. Your sister's marriage to Beckett absolutely cannot have any issues. Here's some money for you, go far away and don't let Beckett find you again." This is my dad. Between me and my sister, he never hesitates to favor her. But when it comes between my sister and the company's interests, he would also choose the latter without hesitation. I didn't hesitate and immediately agreed, then moved to a residence with better security facilities. Freed from constraints, my clothing store, which had been shut down in my previous life, flourished, even opening a second branch within 6 months. During rare moments of respite, I heard recent updates about my family from friends. It said that Beckett couldn't bear Esme's constant crying and accusations, eventually filing for divorce, only for Esme to refuse. My mother even got involved, fiercely protective as always, storming into Beckett's house and pressuring him into retracting his statement. Later, Beckett's mother berated Esme for being unable to bear children, prompting Esme to complain tearfully to my mother. In response, my mother publicly pointed out how Beckett's mother used underhanded methods to marry Beckett's father, humiliating her thoroughly in their social circle. The two families kept making a fuss over Esme and Beckett, but were still tied together by their business cooperation, living a make-do life. I had nothing to say about it. After listening, I put these matters out of my mind and continued preparing to open my new branch. Getting a second chance isn't easy, regardless of what others do, at least I should cherish it myself. 3 years later. On the opening day of my third store in Jiangqing's most bustling commercial district, the first autumn rain began to fall. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, I suddenly remembered that rainy night in my past life. Holding my child in the empty living room, listening as Beckett told Esme over the phone, "I'll be right back." That was when I realized a home could feel so cold. %%. Now, the sound of rain remains the same, but the floor-to-ceiling windows are filled with warm yellow light. The shop is lined with flower baskets sent by customers, and the employees, dressed in the champagne-colored uniforms I designed myself, smile more brilliantly than the flowers. "Boss, someone sent flowers, no name attached," the assistant said, walking over with a massive bouquet of white roses. I smiled as I took it and casually pulled out the card. It bore only a single line, the handwriting as elegant as ever, "Congratulations, Iris. This time, I finally didn't stand in your way." The signature read, "Beckett." I froze for half a second before tossing the card into the trash, feeling not a single ripple of emotion. He didn't stand in my way this time, and I didn't look back at him, either. The ribbon-cutting ceremony concluded, and the rain had stopped. I went downstairs for some fresh air and noticed a familiar-looking car parked by the roadside. The window rolled down, revealing a man wearing gold-rimmed glasses. He smiled at me and said softly, "Iris, excuse me. My name is Elias, from Yunjin Capital. I've been following your brand closely and would like to discuss the next round of funding with you." I raised an eyebrow. "Yunjin Capital? I heard you only invest in projects destined to become industry leaders." Handing me a business card, he replied with a gentle smile, "That's exactly why I came all the way to Jiangqing to meet you. I've heard many versions of your story, But I want to hear from you personally, what does the future blueprint look like? That day we talked for a full 3 hours. He spoke slowly and methodically, yet always managed to pinpoint my thoughts at the most crucial moments. When we parted, he asked if I'd like to have dinner together. I intended to refuse, but found myself nodding inexplicably. Later, we became business partners, and then, he became the one in my life who would remember my menstrual cycle and secretly slip a heat pack against the small of my back when I stayed up late revising designs. He never asked about my past, only held me one late night and said, "Iris, you deserve all the good things in this world." On the day our 5th store opened, Elias went down on one knee and offered me a ring. Behind us, the entire shop was filled with champagne roses, accompanied by the cheering laughter of all my employees. I cried like a fool, yet smiled brighter than ever before. The wedding was set on an island, inviting only the closest friends. I walked barefoot on the beach in the haute couture wedding dress I designed myself. When the sea breeze lifted the hem of my dress, I suddenly recalled the coldness and despair of drowning in my previous life. It turns out that people can truly escape death and then be cherished in another's palms, living a completely different life. During the ring exchange, Elias leaned down to kiss me, whispering so quietly that only I could hear, "Iris, let's spend the rest of our lives together." I nodded, tears mixing with laughter as they fell. In the distance, the sunset dyed the sea into a vast, warm orange silk. I held his hand tightly, suddenly recalling Beckett's bouquet of white roses. "Thank you for finally letting go. And thank you, myself. What I couldn't protect no matter how hard I tried in my past life, I've finally grasped firmly in this one. And my happiest destination was never someone's mercy. It was me, step by step, walking into the sunlight and into the arms of those who love me.